Started. Welcome everyone to our Fair Housing and Power Hour series. This is a program of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and today we will be discussing fair housing fundamentals. I'm your trainer, Brittany Mellinger, and I'm a Fair Housing Training and Outreach Coordinator here at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Before we get started, I want to note that it is against the law in Pennsylvania to record oral conversations without the permission of the folks involved in most circumstances, and this session is being recorded for training and/or record-keeping purposes. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of the session. At any time, if you have a question or comment, please feel free to put that in the chat and we will respond to you as soon as possible. And if you would like to ask your question or comment verbally, please note that by doing so, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of your statements recorded as part of this session. I would also like to thank Caroline Griffin, our Director of Rural and Civic Engagement, for providing our technical assistance for this program today. And I would like to apologize to everyone that we will not be able to have ASL and captioning available for this session. And as I mentioned in that recording statement, this is being recorded and we will send out the recording as well as all of the slides from the program following the end of the program. It should be within the next few days. So let's get started. So fair housing is the right of everyone in Pennsylvania. We know how central housing is to so many things that make for a healthy and fulfilling life, from the ability to send your kids to a good school, to have transportation, access to quality jobs, to clean water and air, and housing, and the ability to choose your housing and where you'd like to live is a big part of that. So that's why we put a strong focus on ensuring that folks can access housing opportunities in Pennsylvania. Today we're going to be going over the fair housing basics. So we've got an hour together today, and in that hour I'd like to provide you with a basic overview of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. We'll be discussing relevant fair housing laws and protected classes, and then we'll be diving into discriminatory practices, providing an overview of what housing discrimination looks like in Pennsylvania. We will close out our session by providing a brief overview of the complaint process, and throughout today's presentation, I hope to be able to answer any fair housing questions that you have. So please feel free to put any comments or questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can throughout the presentation, but we will also reserve some time at the end for any additional questions that you have. I do want to note that this is a pretty introductory coverage of our fair housing laws. There's only so much we can get to in an hour, and if you are interested in more in-depth training, we certainly can offer that, and I would encourage you to reach out to me afterwards. I do want to give you a disclaimer that information, materials, and/or technical assistance are intended solely as informal guidance and are neither a determination of your legal rights or responsibilities under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act and/or applicable federal laws, nor binding on any agency with enforcement responsibility under those same laws. This is solely an educational program. So starting off with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, or PHRC for short. So the PHRC, we've been around for 70 years. It was established in 1955, and this agency exists so that Pennsylvanians can live, work, and learn free from unlawful discrimination. We have a two-part mission, and we work to enforce Pennsylvania's non-discrimination laws, which include both the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, as well as the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act. We do that through accepting and investigating complaints of discrimination as they come in, but we also work to actively promote equal opportunity for all in Pennsylvania. We do that through educational programs like this, through conferences and events, and we also have advisory councils and social justice ambassadors, which are volunteers and community partners that work with us to spread the word about Pennsylvanians' rights in the fair housing space as well as beyond, and work to establish community connections to further our work. We serve the entire state of Pennsylvania, and we do that through 3 regional offices. So in the western part of the state, that's served by our Pittsburgh regional office. The central part of the state in the light blue, that's served by our Harrisburg regional office. And the eastern part of the state in that medium blue, that's served by our Philadelphia regional office. We also have a central office that handles administrative functions of the agency. I mentioned our 2 laws just a minute ago, and I want to let you know what they cover. So the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act really does a lot of the heavy lifting for our protections. In addition to housing, it also covers employment, commercial property, public accommodations, such as the ability to access public services and businesses, as well as primary and secondary education up through high school. The Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act extends that coverage into post-secondary education as well, such as colleges, trade schools, and technical schools. If you would like further information on any of those other protections, we have a wealth of information on our website as well as trainings on all of those topics. But let's dive into our fair housing laws. At PHRC, we talk about fair housing as having 2 goals. So goal number 1, ending housing discrimination, making sure that no one is kept out of housing opportunities because of housing discrimination. Everyone's got a fair shot, equal opportunity at housing. But fair housing goes beyond that. Goal number 2 is promoting diverse, inclusive communities, and that's known as affirmatively furthering fair housing. So the federal definition of that has changed multiple times over the past few years, but what's at the heart of that is that in our country, we've had a lot of policies, practices, laws that have prevented fair housing and have restricted access to housing. And that's really shaped our housing landscape and who can access housing today. So there's active work that we all need to be doing to promote diverse, inclusive communities, ensuring that everyone can access housing. So what do our fair housing laws cover? They cover the sale and the rental of housing, as well as housing-related transactions. Sale and rental of housing is relatively straightforward, but housing-related transactions might be a little bit murkier. So that could look like the ability to get a mortgage, to get a fair appraisal of the value of your home, to be able to buy insurance for your home. Any of those industries that can surround access to housing also need to comply with our fair housing laws. The types of housing that are covered by our fair housing laws are really broad. So it's anything from apartments to single-family homes, manufactured housing communities, condominiums, public housing, nursing homes, dormitories, and more. Even some types of shelters are covered by our fair housing laws. There are multiple discrimination theories, and I want to define disparate treatment as well as disparate impact for you. Disparate treatment is treatment that directly discriminates against a member of a protected class. So someone's receiving different treatment because of an aspect of their identity. So for example, looking at the protected class of disability, someone with a visible, observable disability goes to view an apartment, and the property manager thinks that apartment isn't going to be safe for that individual, so they deny them that unit and say, you know what, I'm really sorry, I can't rent this to you. I don't think this is safe for you. So they were denied that housing because of their protected class. Disparate impact can be a little bit harder to spot. So it's a policy that's facially neutral, doesn't mention any protected classes, but it has that disparate or disproportionate impact on a member of a protected class. So looking again at the protected class of disability, that could look like a property manager that has a policy that all individuals with a need to have full-time employment to qualify for the unit. So it's a policy that doesn't mention disability at all, but but it's going to have that impact because a lot of individuals with disability have income from other sources. They might receive benefits, they might have part-time employment, have other sources of income, but they're less likely, statistically, we know, to have full-time employment. So this is a policy that could restrict housing opportunities and could be accomplished through other ways. I want to do a brief overview of our fair housing laws. There are multiple levels of fair housing laws. So there's our federal laws, which include the Fair Housing Act of 1968. It's the fair housing law that most folks are familiar with, but there's also Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which adds additional protections for individuals in federally subsidized housing. There's also the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the ADA, which adds additional protections for the individuals with disabilities. Now, if you were paying attention just a moment ago, I mentioned the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act as our law that provides housing protections in Pennsylvania. That's our state law. But there's also local ordinances as well at the local level, which add even further protections for individuals depending on where they live in Pennsylvania. There are over 70 different ordinances in Pennsylvania. I'm curious if anyone would want to put in the chat if they're aware of any ordinances in the area where they live, any additional protections that are put into place through a local ordinance. If there's a local Human Relations Commission in your area, always curious to see what areas folks are from and working in, and who's aware of any additional protections. These local ordinances can add on additional protected classes beyond what's available at the federal and the state level. In today's training, we're going to be primarily focusing in on federal and state protections, but it's important to know that there may be additional protections in your locality. Right. So we're going to talk about some differences between our federal and our state law in terms of who's covered as well as in terms of the filing timeline. So under the Fair Housing Act, housing providers with 4 or more properties are required to comply with our fair housing laws unless they publicly advertise vacancies or receive federal funding. So really small landlords with 3 or fewer properties don't need to comply unless they publicly advertise their vacancies or receive federal funding. However, that exemption doesn't exist at the state level under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. It's housing providers with 1 or more property. So even our small landlords need to be fully aware of their fair housing responsibilities to make sure that they are not violating our state law. The filing timeline looks a little bit different under our federal and our state statute. So housing complaints must be filed within 365 days of the date of the last harm. If folks are looking to file a complaint under the Fair Housing Act with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And then at the state level, under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, if someone would like to file a complaint with the PHRC, they need to file within 180 days of the date of the last harm, so about 6 months. So it's important to know that our timeline is a little bit shorter than the federal one. All right, before I advance to our next slide, I'd like to invite everyone to get on their brainstorming caps, and we are going to see how many protected classes we can name in the chat. So I'd like to invite everyone to get out there, to click on the option for the chat box at the top of your screen and put in any protected classes that you're familiar with, that you think might have protections, either at the federal or the state level. All right, thanks, Morgan. Disability and race, absolutely. Ebony seniors, yes, age 40 and above is a protected class at the state level. Sex, absolutely. Age, thank you. What else? What other protected classes do we have? Familial status, yes. Presence of kids in a family. Nationality or national origin, thanks, Anita, absolutely. Any other ones? Anything that we're missing here? Race? Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, you guys did a great job. I'm going to advance the slide so you can see which ones we got in the chat and which ones we might have missed. So you can see there's two lists of protected classes on this slide. On the left-hand side of the screen, those are the protected classes that are at the federal level under the Fair Housing Act. There's 7 here. We've got race, color, national origin, familial status, religion, sex, and disability. You can see that those are closely mirrored on the right-hand side of the screen, but we've got a couple additional ones. So we've got race, color, national origin, familial status, religious creed, sex, and disability, but we also add on age 40 and above, ancestry, as well as the use, handling, or training of support animals for disability. And again, I want to mention if you live in an area with a local ordinance, there may be even further protected classes in your area. We are going to go into a little bit more detail on familial status, on sex, and disability. So starting with familial status, that is defined as families with children under the age of 18 who are living with their parents or legal custodians. It also includes people who are pregnant, as well as people who are securing custody of children under the age of 18. And it includes foster children as well, not just biological children. An exemption that you should be aware of is for housing covered by the Housing for Older Persons Act. So there are 55 and over communities, as well as 62 and over communities that are specifically designed for older adults, and they have specific rules. If they do comply with those rules and regulations, there can be limitations placed on families with children living there. But you can check out the Housing for Older Persons Act for more information on that. Next, I want to discuss sex as a protected class under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. So while you didn't see the term LGBTQ, you didn't see sexual orientation or gender identity listed on our list of protected classes, PHRC did finalize regulations in 2023 that established the term sex may refer to pregnancy status, childbirth status, breastfeeding status, sex assigned at birth, gender identity or expression, affectional or sexual orientation, as well as differences in sex development. So if an individual believes that they've experienced discrimination on any aspect of their identity that's covered in that list, they can file a complaint under the protected class of sex at PHRC and have that case investigated. We use those regulations as we accept complaints, as we conduct investigations, and as we adjudicate cases. And you can learn more at the link at the bottom of the screen, which goes to our website. You can find our regulations. You can find a fact sheet with some more information about discrimination based on sex. Now, in the past, the federal government also accepted complaints of sexual orientation, gender identity under the protected class of sex. My understanding is that they are no longer doing so, but people still do have the right to file that complaint at the PHRC if they would like to do so. The last protected class that I wanted to go into more detail about is disability. So that's defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of a person's major life activities. So some examples here could be caring for oneself, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, or working. And our fair housing laws protect those who have a disability, those who have a history of a disability, or those who are regarded as having a disability. So it makes sense that those who have a disability that would meet that definition would have protections under disability, but sometimes folks are confused at why folks with a history of a disability or who are regarded as having a disability, why they're included in these protections as well. And the reality is that you don't have to have a disability to be treated to experience discrimination based on someone's perception of you or their knowledge of your disability or your medical history. There's a lot of disabilities that have stigma around them. So if you're treated unfairly in your housing based on your housing provider's knowledge of your history or how they regard you as having a disability, you can also file a complaint and have that investigated as well. Now, there are some disability-related exemptions that I want to cover. So individuals who are currently using illegal drugs or controlled substances are exempted from disability-related protection. That does not include those who are in active recovery. So if someone had previously been using illegal drugs, but they're now in active recovery, they still would have disability-related protections. But these protections do not cover folks who are currently using illegal drugs. Additionally, individuals who pose a direct threat to the health and safety of others are also exempt from disability-related protections. All right, I'm going to give a quick pause to see if there's any questions on any of the content we covered so far. Please feel free to pop any questions that you have in the chat because we're going to be moving on in just a minute to talk about discriminatory actions. All right, I am not seeing any questions in the chat so far. What would cause a direct threat based on disability? So this should be something that would be able to be documented. This is not an assumption based on stereotypes or just someone's belief that someone might be threatening. There would need to be evidence that there was an imminent threat, and I can get some more official language um, and get that information to you. All right, I also see a question about maintenance drugs. Could you provide a little bit more specifics about what you're asking about? And we can come back to that topic. I see a question about having an emotional support tiger. And we will be talking about reasonable accommodations briefly, having a reasonable accommodation. Oh, okay, yes, a direct threat. So thank you, Morgan, for that. Having that would be an example of something that would be a direct threat. A wild animal that's on the property would be considered a direct threat. All right. Thank you so much, Lily, for that additional uh, information, and I will follow up with you after the training to address that question. That's a great question. All right, moving on to our discriminatory actions, and thank you so much for everyone that has put questions and comments in the chat. It's always helpful to get folks' inputs and ideas as part of this training. Our first action that we want to talk about is just discriminatory statements, and that's defined as printing or circulating statements indicating a preference or a limitation related to protected class. So we've got some examples here on the screen. Near a Catholic school, perfect for empty nesters. Near a Korean grocery, or great for singles. I'd love if someone could put in the chat why you think these are issues in a housing advertisement. Why would we maybe not want to have these types of statements as we're advertising housing? Does anybody see any issues with these statements, or do you think they're okay? Yes. There's allusions to religion and age restrictions. It says who is and who's not welcome, and they actually sound discriminatory. Yeah, there's a clear preference for certain types of folks based on their religion, based on what their household looks like, based on someone's national origin or their ancestry. Uh, yes. So you can't use these types of statements in housing advertisements, and we have information on our website, and in some of our slides we've got actual lists of statements that you can't use in housing advertisements. I can make sure to add those into the slide deck when I send them out. Um, let's see, I see a comment in the chat. When they're advertising room for rent, but only to single women and the poster is a single guy. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you should describe, a housing provider should describe the actual characteristics of the housing itself, not who they think would be a good fit to live there. Our next action that we're going to talk about is making housing unavailable, and that's defined as refusing to sell, lease, finance, or otherwise withhold housing or commercial property. Some examples here, a realtor who's not showing homes to a Latino couple because the seller knows that the neighbors don't want those kinds of people in their neighborhood. That's steering and limiting housing opportunities based on someone's national origin or their ancestry. A bank who's refusing to lend money to a pregnant woman because she can't prove she will go back to work once the baby's born. That's lending discrimination. It could be on the basis of familial status, potentially on sex as well. And falsely stating that a property or a unit is not available when it actually is, because the landlord thinks the prospective tenant is too old to live independently. So that could be based on age, but also based on their perception of the tenant's abilities. So it could be disability as well. Under discriminatory terms or conditions, that's discrimination in the terms or conditions of the sale, lease, or financing of housing. So examples of what that could look like would be higher fees for families with teenagers. Uh, could be an extra security deposit for service and support animals, or increased monthly rental costs, but just for individuals of certain races. Uh, the terms and conditions, whether that's in the lease, whether that's in the sale, they have to be consistent for everybody, regardless of their protected class. Under discriminatory terms and conditions, that also means the provision of facilities, services, or privileges that are connected with ownership, occupancy, or use of housing or commercial property. So examples here include not allowing children to use the pool, ignoring or taking longer to complete maintenance requests for a tenant who has a mental health condition, or unequal application of rules or lease provision for women. So limiting the facilities, limiting the services, limiting the way or unfairness in the ways that these rules or lease provisions are being implemented on a property. So we've got discriminatory inquiries as well. That's defined as making an inquiry or a record related to protected class in connection with the sale, lease, or financing of housing. So some examples here include asking someone with a disability if they have a disability on a mortgage application, or asking a caller who's inquiring about an apartment for their age or if they have children. So potential housing provider, someone who's selling a home, someone who's financing a home shouldn't be making decisions on someone's protected class, so they shouldn't be asking these questions during the application process. Next up, we've got steering, and that's defined as attempting to induce listing, sale, or other transaction, or discourage purchase or lease by making direct or indirect references to the present or future protected class composition of the neighborhood. So examples of steering could include encouraging families to live near other families in an apartment complex. They're saying, oh, why don't you go over to this building where there's lots of families, it's a little bit noisier, won't be disturbing the other residents, or encouraging folks to go on the first floor, perhaps. We also see this in situations with home buyers, so only sharing property listings in majority of Black neighborhoods to Black home buyers. And at the link at the bottom of the screen, that goes to an interesting investigation that happened and was published by Newsday several years ago. It's called Long Island Divided, and it's an interactive report where you can actually see some recordings, hear some audio, and see some results from some fair housing testing that happened in Long Island. I see some discussion in the chat regarding rejection for people with low-income housing vouchers. And Director Berman, you're right that that would be covered under source of income protections, which are available in some localities throughout the state of Pennsylvania. But at present, source of income protections are not available at the state or the federal level. So in some areas of Pennsylvania, it's not. Um, Housing providers aren't able to advertise as not accepting like Section 8 or housing choice vouchers, things like that. But that's not a statewide thing. All right. Next up, we have predatory lending and redlining. That's targeting people for unfair or deceptive loans based on protected factors such as race, sex, or age. So we've got an example from uh, a couple years ago. There was a settlement of $20 million across 4 states in the greater Philadelphia area. This mortgage company um, was distributing racist language about minority and majority areas, avoiding servicing minority majority neighborhoods, and targeting advertising to majority white neighborhoods. So choosing their services, advertising their services for a very specific demographic, not offering their services to the general public. All right, next up, we've got unreasonable use of criminal history. So there is federal guidance about how housing providers can avoid discriminatory practices in tenant background screenings. So a person's criminal history cannot be the sole factor in denying housing. So we sometimes call it like a blanket ban, keeping everyone who has had interactions in the criminal justice system from accessing housing, and arrest records can also not be used in the application process. So this is an area where we see issues with disparate impact. So a policy that has disproportionate impact on members of a protected class. So to prevent that, a housing provider is required to consider the person in their entirety. And it's suggested that a housing provider use multiple factors when approving or denying an applicant. So those factors can include reference checks, credit scores, income, and employment, and a case-by-case analysis of an applicant should include the recency of the offense, the severity of the offense, as well as any mitigating circumstances. And our partner at the Housing Equality has an article on best practices for tenant screening that's linked at the bottom of the screen there. Thanks so much for that comment in the chat. PTRC litigated a case that was involving the arrest of a tenant's grandson, and that was a $90,000 settlement. All right, next up we have appraisal bias. So that's defined as the use of protected classes when determining the fair market value of a property. So that's been featured in news articles over the past few years regarding households that chose to whitewash a property to receive a fair appraisal, a fair valuation of the value of their home. So typically we hear about this in where households of color receive an appraisal where they feel like it wasn't fair and reflective of the value of their home. So they chose to take all things out of their home, family photos, any products, any things in their home that they thought might reflect their race or ethnicity, and have someone else stand in for them, a friend or a family member, to see if they get a different valuation of their property. And there's been a lot of anecdotal cases, but there's also been fair housing testing that was completed by the National Fair Housing Alliance that has shown that this is a systemic issue as well. So some potential issues that can arise in the appraisal report that homeowners and homebuyers should be aware of can be anything from overt statements to issues in the subject property description, in the comparable sales selection, in the ways that adjustments are applied, as well as in reconciliation. So the National Fair Housing Alliance has a great presentation with more information on that, which is linked at the bottom of the screen. All right, I see a question in the chat about is this where general pricing of a rental falls into play? as a discriminating factor. I'd love for you to expand on that a little bit, um, so I can learn a little bit more about that concern, and I'd be happy to answer that then. And while you're putting into that chat, I'm going to move on to discussing sexual harassment. So sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination, and it's prohibited by the Federal Fair Housing Act, by the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, as well as federal laws. And in September 2016, HUD did release a final rule on this matter. So it establishes two main types of harassment. So quid pro quo, that's a Latin phrase. It means this for that. It's when a housing provider subjects a person to an unwelcomed request or demand for sexual favors, and submitting is a condition of obtaining or maintaining their housing or housing-related services. So nationally, we saw there was an increase in this type of harassment throughout the pandemic. Folks were unexpectedly out of work, without a paycheck, at home, and there were some housing providers that took advantage of that, saying, well, you can't make this month's rent. How about you do this for me instead? And no one should be subject to demands on their body in order to maintain their housing. Um, and oftentimes this type of harassment, as well as the hostile environment harassment, they target folks without a lot of housing options, who feel like they can't reach out and complain when things happen. It's especially predatory. Hostile environment, that's when a person is subjected to unwelcome conduct that's sufficiently severe or pervasive that it interferes with or deprives the tenant of their right to use and enjoy their housing. So it's unwelcomed, and it's either one sufficiently severe incident or pervasive incidents over time that keep tenants from being able to use and enjoy their housing. So common sense tips for housing providers to avoid sexual harassment claims, making sure that the whole team gets regular training. They've got clear policies against harassment that are widely distributed, making sure that everyone knows how to report issues of harassment, and keeping housing transactions professional with residents and potential residents, not initiating hugs, kissing, or other forms of touching, not making comments about someone's physical appearance, not asking personal questions, and not entering the resident's unit unless needed for maintenance or inspection purposes. Thanks so much, Kate, for explaining your comment a little bit more. Intentionally pricing a property above and beyond what local residents will have the ability to afford as a way to narrow down the pool of interested parties. Thinking of gentrification in Detroit or New York City, where the local employers do not provide the income needed 3 times greater than the expected housing cost. Housing providers are allowed to set the price to what the market will bear. There's nothing in fair housing that sets the price that a landlord can charge. However, we do know that constrained housing supply, where we haven't kept up with enough of housing supply, especially in areas where a lot of folks want to live, that can mean that a lot of residents aren't able to afford to stay, whether they're homeowners, whether renters, and there's a lot of investments that are needed in Pennsylvania's housing stock. So I'd encourage you to check out our white paper, The State of Fair Housing in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where we dive a little bit deeper into a lot of those barriers that can prevent communities from accessing housing, to learn a little bit more about the work we're doing in that space. Thanks so much for that comment. All right, and I want to touch briefly on reasonable accommodations and modifications. That's a topic that we could spend a full hour or 2 hours on talking about, but just a really brief overview. In addition to the protections that we covered so far, individuals with disabilities also have the right to request reasonable accommodations and modifications that are needed to use and enjoy their housing. So what's the difference? A reasonable modification, that's a structural change that's made to the premises. And a reasonable accommodation is a change, exception, or adjustment to a rule, policy, practice, or service. Okay, so before I advance to my next slides, which have a couple examples of modifications and accommodations, I'd love to see if we can identify some in the chat. What are some examples of modifications or accommodations that an individual might need to use and enjoy their housing? And while folks are entering that, I want to take a look at the comment there. So what if it's because they want a tenant to move out so they can keep increasing the rent? Um, and I think that's in regards to our discussion around displacement. Um, so a housing provider can't um, increase the rent in regards to any protected class, um, but they can increase the rent um, if they're doing it fairly um, with all of their tenants. That would be permissible. But I'm seeing some great examples of accommodations and modifications in the chat here. Uh, Hold bars or grab bars in the bathroom, ramps, a modified bathtub, grab bars or ramps, an access ramp. Those are all great examples of reasonable modifications. So that's where we're changing something in the structure of the premises. It's a physical change. We've got changing when the date that rent is due. That's a great example of a reasonable accommodation. You're changing a policy. When is the rent due? Well, if you're getting income because of your disability, if you're getting like SSDI income and it's coming after the rent due date, where the rent is due for the rest of the tenants, someone could request a change to a different date that it's due each month. So that way they're not incurring these late fees because of their disability. And then a wheelchair lift is an example of a modification as well. So thank you so much to everyone who put that information in the chat. So it is considered to be a discriminatory action to refuse to allow a person with a disability permission to modify and to pay for the changes that enable them to use the facility. So I want to restate that so that's a little bit clearer. It's the tenant's responsibility to make the request, and it's the landlord's responsibility to grant permission to make that request, and then it's the tenant's responsibility to pay for that in the private rental market. If the housing provider does receive federal funds, then it's the housing provider's responsibility to pay for the modification, not the tenant. And the housing provider does have the ability to require residents to restore the interior back to the original condition at the end of tenancy, minus normal wear and tear. So I think we covered the examples in the chat, the grab bars and the wheelchair. Those are really common examples of modifications that can enable someone to be able to use and enjoy their housing. So for reasonable accommodations, it's discriminatory to refuse to make reasonable accommodations in the rules, policies, practices, or services necessary to afford equal opportunity for a person with a disability to use and enjoy a housing accommodation. So we covered the first example already, not allowing a person with disability income to pay their rent on a different date than other tenants, refusing to designate reserved parking for an individual with a disability who needs it to be able to access their housing. A big one is service animals and support animals, not allowing a person with a disability to have that animal, even when there's a no pet policy in place at the facility. And then a lot of these have focused on landlords and their responsibilities, but sometimes there's reasonable accommodations that can impact local governments as well. Uh, so an example of discriminatory action here would be refusing to allow an adjustment to zoning policies that's needed to allow a group home for individuals with disabilities to live in the community. So to wrap up our discussion on that, some best practices. Housing provider should have an established policy for handling requests. They should document everything in writing. They should make sure that they're only asking information, the information that's needed to process the request and allowing the tenant sufficient time for documentation to be submitted back. A housing provider should respond back in a timely manner and make sure that they're engaging in interactive dialogue to meet the needs of the tenant. All right. Now I see a comment repeating the last point about redlining of supporting supportive housing. Um, I apologize. I don't recall my specific point on that, but I'd be happy to follow up with you after the training on that. But I do want to move on to the complaint process. If you believe that you've experienced housing discrimination, you have the right to file a complaint with PHRC, and you can get that complaint started by contacting the regional office that's nearest to you, or you can contact our main phone number and we will get you to the right place. So I do want to note that for folks in our Harrisburg regional office, that office address has changed. We're now at 555 Walnut Street, Suite 808, instead of on Market Street. So that's where you can find us. You also can reach us on email. You can contact us through our website. There's lots of ways to get in touch with us, but we'll make sure that you get to the right place, which is our intake team. So your first step is to connect with PHRC's intake team. You'll be asked to fill out a housing questionnaire to provide our team with contact information for you, what you experienced, and why, and who you're filing a complaint against. And then the intake team will assess this information to see if this is the situation that we can investigate under our state law. Make sure that it's jurisdictional, and make sure that it's timely within that 180 days. And then the intake team will help the person filing the complaint to finalize their complaint. And then after that, the person who is filed against will be notified. So both parties will receive a copy of the complaint. And it moves into the investigative phase from there. So both parties will be asked to provide information to a neutral investigator who's responsible for investigating if there is a violation of our state law. They may do this by asking for documents, interviewing witnesses, holding a fact-finding hearing, or seeking other ways to obtain evidence. Mediation services may also be an option depending on the case and if both parties would agree to mediation. We've got a fantastic mediation team, but it is a voluntary process, and both parties do need to agree to mediate to engage in that. But regardless, the investigator will also explore if it's possible to settle the case before coming to a finding. So if the case proceeds to a finding, there are two possible outcomes. So if probable cause is found, that means that there was enough evidence to establish that discrimination occurred. If no probable cause is found, that means there wasn't enough evidence to determine that discrimination occurred. And if no probable cause is found, that's pretty much where the process ends, unless someone chooses to appeal that. If probable cause is found, then the case may be conciliated. It might advance to public hearing in front of one of our hearing examiners or commissioners, or it might be filed in court. And at this point, PHRC's goal is to seek a remedy for the discrimination that occurred. And a lot of times there are questions about how long it takes to investigate a case, and that really does vary. It's based on the evidence, based on the speediness of responses, as well as other factors. So at this point, a lot of folks are like, well, why would I go through this whole process? It sounds long and involved, but there are real remedies that can be achieved. It can be anything from achieving a reasonable accommodation or modification when that had been denied. It could be changes to a lease or other policies, ensuring that all tenants of that housing provider have a fair lease and policies. Often involves the posting of fair housing notices and training for respondents, ensuring that the respondent has a full awareness of their fair housing responsibilities. And there can also be financial remedies as well. Anything from reimbursement of fees and out-of-pocket expenses to money for humiliation and embarrassment, which is similar to pain and suffering. And that's only available in our housing and commercial property cases, not in the other types of cases that are filed at PHRC. Lastly, there may be civil penalties that are assessed if the case advances to public hearings because of the violation of our state law. So what do these awards look like? We've got a list of some cases, anywhere from our top line case of 1.5 million, and that's a case in which a housing provider failed to provide accessible units and ignored requests for reasonable accommodations for tenants with disabilities, $100,000 case where a maintenance worker sexually harassed a female tenant, $90,000 where a housing provider revoked a lease and failed to address neighbor harassment based on race, and $77,000 where a housing provider made discriminatory statements and refused to rent to a household based on their familial status. So you can see we see cases that really span the spectrum based on particular class, based on the discriminatory action. You can see we do see a significant variety of cases that come across our offices. Before I close out the training today, I do want to note that we have some fair housing resources for folks that want to learn more. We do have a fair housing line that you can use to reach us, 855-866-5718. If you have a fair housing question or are looking for further resources, please feel free to give us a call. We do offer other fair housing training programs, like the one today. We offer longer, more in-depth ones, and those are free of charge. We offer them to housing providers, to local leaders. We offer them to advocates, to social service providers. So if you're interested in training for your team, please reach out to me afterwards. We have a full archive of our Fair Housing and Power Hour series. So if you want to do some on-demand learning, please feel free to click on that and that'll take you to our YouTube page. We offer written materials such as brochures and fact sheets, as well as you can access the white paper that I mentioned earlier, the State of Fair Housing in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we've got 6 years of our show PHRC Speaks, which aired on PCN TV. We've got all of that on our YouTube as well. If you're interested in seeing some interviews with folks that are advancing fair housing work throughout the Commonwealth, you can check those out as well. I'm also going to leave you with contact information. You can email me, you can call our main line, get in touch with us at our central office if you have any questions or concerns. I will also note that there is a QR code here on the screen. If you want to provide some feedback on this training, what you found helpful, what you'd want to hear in future trainings, something that you found confusing, we really welcome your feedback and would love to hear from you. I'm also going to put that link in the chat so that you can click on that if that is easier than a QR code. But I'd like to thank you all for your participation in today's program. As promised, I did leave a few minutes for additional Q&A, so if there's any other questions that folks have, I'm happy to address them at this time. So I will hang out here. If anyone wants to ask further questions, happy to answer them, but you all are welcome to go about the rest of your day. I'd like to thank you for taking your lunch hour to join us and to learn more about fair housing protections in Pennsylvania. And yeah, and I do want to also mention that I will be sending out the slides and materials and recording after the presentation as well. I see the question about the way to view the full presentation. We will upload that to YouTube, and we will send out the link to everyone who registered. So I'll make sure that you can access the rest of the presentation. So thanks so much for that question. Seeing no other questions, I am going to close this out. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.